Is it possible that McLaren raced knowing that their cars were illegal? And why is the FIA now talking about new tests after weeks of silence? Today, we uncover the truth behind the scandal that is shaking the strongest team of 2025. Lando Norris had crossed the finish line in an outstanding second position. Oscar Piastri had been fourth after an intense race. McLaren was emerging as the team to beat, consolidating its dominance after the Constructors' title in 2024 and comfortably leading the table in 2025. But all that collapsed in a matter of minutes. When the FIA published the official measurement results, it was confirmed that Norris MCL 39 recorded thicknesses of 8.88 mm and 8.93 mm at two key points, below the regulatory minimum of 9 mm. In the case of Piastri, the differences were 0.04 mm and 0.26 mm respectively. Tiny details, the thickness of a grain of sand, yes, but in F1 the rule is not interpreted, it is applied. The sanction was immediate, disqualification for both pilots. No appeal possible. No room for discussion. But this is where the really worrying thing begins. Because this disqualification was not seen as an isolated technical error, but as the tip of the iceberg. The situation was not limited to a simple irregularity. The dimensions of the scandal grew when it became known that the FIA had identified certain suspicious patterns in telemetry and radio orders. What seemed like a design flaw or unforeseen wear and tear began to look like a deliberate cover-up, a calculated maneuver to maximize the car's performance at the cost of crossing the limits of technical legality. Las Vegas was not only a race with an altered result. It was the place where the dominant narrative of the year abruptly changed. McLaren, which had been the most solid, the most methodical, the most efficient team, became under a blanket of suspicion. How is it possible that a team with such a level of preparation and precision has not detected such critical wear? Or did they know before the green light and decided to take the risk? This incident unleashed a political, media, and sports storm. There was talk in the paddock of the night of the plank, and rivals were quick to question whether McLaren had been operating with an illegal advantage for more races. Meanwhile, the FIA, pressured by recent precedents of institutional weakness, found here the perfect opportunity to revalidate its authority. The bomb was activated, and its explosion was just the beginning of a much deeper problem. When the dust from the race in Las Vegas seemed to settle, the FIA burst in again with an unexpected statement. The McLaren case was not closed. On the contrary, new evidence had come to light. This was additional evidence, carefully reviewed in the days following the Grand Prix, indicating that the Woking team was not only aware of the wear on their car's plates, but acted to cover it up in the heat of the competition. The key: radio communications between engineers and pilots, as well as internal telemetry recorded in the MCL 39. Unusual patterns were detected in these transmissions that had not been fully explained at the time of the initial disqualification. On several occasions, both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri were instructed to modify their driving style in very specific sectors of the circuit. Turns 5, 11, and 17. The repeated indication was clear: lift and coast. Lift your foot off the accelerator before braking, and gently slide the car to the apex. At first glance, this could be interpreted as a strategy to conserve tires or reduce energy consumption. But technical analysis dismantles that justification. The curves mentioned are points of high lateral demand, where the contact between the flat bottom of the car and the asphalt is more violent. The conclusion was disturbing. McLaren was trying to reduce plate wear in real time during the race by applying aggressive management orders to its drivers. The most disturbing thing is what was not said. The word plank or skid block was never directly mentioned in conversations. The engineers avoided making explicit reference to the part that was at risk. This detail, which in another context could be irrelevant, here took on another nuance. It became evidence that McLaren knew its weakness should not be detected by rivals, the press, or even attentive spectators. The deliberate use of vague codes raised the first alerts in the FIA. For example, Norris engineer Will Joseph suggested reducing the pace in key corners even as the Briton was fighting for the podium. When Norris showed concern about losing pace to Verstappen and Russell, Joseph responded that he was doing so to conserve tires, although there was no sign of abnormal tire degradation at that time. It was a carefully crafted excuse. For his part, Oscar Piastri, who was more stuck in traffic for much of the race, received less instructions. But the ones he received were surgical. Tom Stallard, his engineer, ordered him to lift from turn 10 to turn 11, and confirmed that he had to continue doing so in turn 17, just the sectors where the bottom of the car suffered the most. And therein lies the most compromising point for the team. This unequal management between cars, this apparent improvisation between both sides of the garage, indicates that they were trying to control damage that had already begun before the traffic lights went out. All this led to a critical difference. The iron of Piastri's car ended up more damaged, 0.26 millimeters outside the regulations, than that of Norris, 0.12 millimeters. A difference that could be explained not only by traffic, but by how the team prioritized management in one car over another. In technical words, McLaren was playing a game of chess with pieces they knew were defective, and they bet that no one would discover them. The new test set off all the alarms within the FIA environment. The possibility that the world champion team was operating with an intentional margin outside the regulations not only threatened the outcome of a Grand Prix, but the very integrity of the championship. For this reason, the case was reopened and a formal investigation was initiated that, to this day, is still ongoing. And here the big question arises. If McLaren was willing to risk so much in a race as high profile as Las Vegas, how many times before had they done it without being detected? While Formula One was boiling with rumors and social networks exploded with theories about the Las Vegas scandal, McLaren chose silence. For almost 48 hours after the disqualification, the most successful team of the last year did not issue any statement. There were no impromptu press conferences. There were no interviews with the pilots. Just a void. A void that, in this sport, usually speaks louder than any statement. In a context where every second of silence is interpreted as an indirect admission of guilt, McLaren seemed cornered. Questions began to multiply in the paddock. Why didn't the team explain what happened? What were they trying to contain? Were they negotiating internally with the FIA? Was there something worse that was not yet known? Finally, it was Andrea Stella, the team manager, who stepped forward. With a restrained, almost calculated tone, he issued a written statement addressed to the international press. It was not a public appearance. He did not submit to questions. Just a statement. And the content of that text, far from closing the controversy, opened new fronts. Stella began the document with a formal apology to her drivers and fans. He took responsibility for the technical failure, but immediately introduced a new element that had not been mentioned in the first hours after the disqualification: porpoising. In his words, during the race, both cars experienced abnormal levels of aerodynamic rebound, which caused more severe contact with the ground than had been recorded in the practice sessions. It is a striking statement for several reasons. First, because porpoising had not presented itself as a serious threat to McLaren throughout the 2025 season, not even in circuits traditionally prone to this phenomenon. Second, because no other team reported that type of behavior during the Las Vegas race. And third, because if the car was really bouncing enough to damage the skid block, that should have been evident from the first laps. Stella also mentioned as an additional factor that accidental damage was detected in the lower planks at the end of the race, but he did not clarify how they occurred, nor if those damages were a consequence of porpoising, a collision with a curb, or some other unreported circumstance. And more importantly, it did not explain why this damage had not been anticipated in simulations or structural evaluations prior to the event. Furthermore, in the contractual field, the situation is also delicate. Some major team sponsors with multimillion-dollar contracts tied to the image of sporting integrity have requested private meetings to obtain more detailed explanations. Because in modern F1, the value of a brand goes beyond its technical performance. It is built on a foundation of trust, consistency, and public reputation. And all this happens while McLaren remains the team to beat. With an MCL 39 that, despite the scandal, has proven to be one of the most complete and fastest cars in recent years. The car is not in discussion. Neither is the talent of Norris and Piastri. But the real challenge now is not to win, but to win without leaving any doubts. Win with honor. And that, in Formula One, can be more difficult than crossing the checkered flag first. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.